All right, let's dive right into this explainer and figure out why your brain fights you so incredibly hard when you're proven wrong. I mean, we've all been there, right? You're in a debate, the facts are laid out perfectly in front of you, and yet this physical wall just goes up inside your mind. You just cannot admit defeat. Today, we're going to map out exactly what's happening inside your head during those moments and how understanding this whole mechanism can completely change the way you interact with the world.
So to really get a grip on this, we actually have to travel back to a totally bizarre doomsday cult in the US during the 1950s. These folks were entirely convinced that the world was going to be destroyed by a massive flood on December 21st, 1954. They were so deeply committed to this belief that they literally left their jobs and gave away absolutely all of their possessions. But then the sun rose on December 22nd. No flood. The world was still there. As you can imagine, this intense, gnawing sense of discomfort set in among the group as their absolute certainty violently collided with reality. Now, what's really fascinating here is that this cult's misfortune actually ended up contributing massively to the field of psychology. See, 3 social psychologists had secretly infiltrated this group for the sole purpose of observing their intense inner conflict when the world inevitably didn't end. They got to watch in real time as these people tried to process the fact that they'd given up their entire lives for a prediction that was just fundamentally false.
One of those observing psychologists, a guy named Leon Festinger, gave a name to this exact feeling. He called it cognitive dissonance. Basically, it's that terrible state of uneasiness you feel when you hold inconsistent beliefs, or when your actions completely clash with reality. It's that awful friction in your mind. This concept became a massive area of research because, well, it affects absolutely every single one of us.
You've definitely felt this yourself. It hits you when you learn new information that completely shatters a worldview you've held on to for years. Or maybe you learn something about your own behavior that conflicts with your sense of self. A classic example is believing you're this entirely unbiased, unprejudiced person, but then taking a psychological test that reveals you actually harbor a lot of implicit biases you didn't even know about. You know that uncomfortable sinking feeling in your gut? Yep, that is cognitive dissonance in action.
And this isn't just some poetic metaphor, it's a very real physical reaction. We can actually watch this stress light up on a brain scan. When dissonance strikes, it activates the exact region of your brain that monitors errors in your thoughts and actions. It then heavily engages the area involved in rationalizing and cognitive control, while simultaneously triggering regions tightly linked to raw emotions. We're talking anger and disgust. Your brain is literally entering a state of high alert and emotional stress.
But here's the thing. Just knowing how your brain physically responds to this stress doesn't magically make these feelings any easier to handle. And it certainly doesn't make it easier to admit when we're wrong. Instead, how hard it is to actually change your mind about something depends on a specific psychological trait, which researchers call your resistance to change.
So, the crucial point here is that your resistance relies on a few very specific factors. It depends on how deeply you identify with your belief, the satisfaction you get from your behavior, and probably most importantly, how much pain or loss you'd have to endure to actually change those things. Basically, the higher the stakes, the harder your brain is going to fight to keep you from changing your mind.
Let me give you a scenario that brilliantly illustrates this dilemma. Imagine for a second that you see yourself as a fierce advocate for the environment. It's a core part of your identity, right? But then you discover that the company you work for creates, quite literally, evil villain levels of pollution, and they absolutely refuse to change their ways. Your self-image and your daily actions are now in a direct, severe conflict.
How you react to this depends entirely on your resistance level. If you hate this job and you can easily jump to another opportunity, your resistance to changing your behavior is pretty low. You just quit. But if you've been invested in this company for years, maybe decades, and walking away involves immense financial or social loss, well, your resistance is going to be incredibly high. It becomes incredibly difficult to just walk away from the whole shebang.
Now, let's explore what happens when quitting just isn't an easy option. When you can't easily change your behavior, your brain steps in to build some really clever defenses. It starts playing these tricky games to reduce that awful inner uneasiness without actually requiring you to change your life.
And your brain has quite the toolkit for this. First, it'll scramble to rationalize. You might start finding positive things to say about your polluting company, telling yourself, well, we create jobs and a better quality of life, or you might compare them to companies that dump toxic waste directly into the ocean just to make yours look green by comparison. If that doesn't work, your brain might try selective exposure, where you only listen to media that agrees with you and totally dismiss any challenging voices. Or it might just pull the ultimate simple trick, completely ignoring the uncomfortable facts altogether.
To show just how insanely far the brain will go to protect itself from this discomfort, let's look at a fascinating 2014 research paper. This study involved exactly 121 students. Now, these students were heavily, vocally opposed to a proposed increase in their university tuition. The researchers gave them a highly uncomfortable task. They asked these students to write an essay actively supporting the higher tuition. And the shift in their viewpoints after completing this task is just wild. After being forced to advocate for something they hated, their views actually shifted. They became more in favor of tuition increases. But here is the real trick. To resolve the cognitive dissonance, these students actually misremembered their own past. They recalled themselves as being somewhat okay with the higher tuition in the first place, completely rewriting their own history.
Their brains literally skewed their own memories just to reduce the feeling that their past thoughts were inconsistent with their current actions. Consciously or not, we really do not like feeling inconsistent, and we will clearly go to astonishing lengths to ensure our actions and our self-image seamlessly line up, even if it means flat-out lying to ourselves.
But hey, here is the truly empowering part of this explainer. Cognitive dissonance isn't always a bad thing. In fact, if we learn to recognize it, this intense discomfort can be a major catalyst for growth. It can push us to make better decisions, like finally leaving that unhealthy job we rationalized, or finally identifying and discarding our own deeply held biased beliefs.
To defeat your brain's clever schemes, psychologists recommend following this exact process. Step 1. Pay close attention to that initial defensive, angry response when you encounter new information. Step 2. Remind yourself that you're probably way more biased than you want to think, and make a deliberate, conscious effort to question and analyze your response. And Step 3. Do actual research to ensure your beliefs and actions are based on hard evidence, not just the tricky games your brain is playing to ease your inner conflict.
At the end of the day, the very first step to defeating your brain's defense mechanisms is simply knowing what they're up to. Understanding these mental tricks, recognizing that awful feeling of dissonance for exactly what it is, and accepting your own capacity for bias is your absolute best defense against being trapped by your own stubbornness. So I want to leave you with this provocative thought to chew on as we wrap up this explainer. What uncomfortable truth in your own life is your brain stubbornly trying to rationalize away right now? Pay close attention to that uneasiness, because that might just be the exact place you need to start growing. Thanks for diving into this with me.